Today's video. Today is Sunday, September 22nd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about a brand new NBC News national poll showing a matchup between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, with Vice President Harris with a 5-point lead nationwide in a massive improvement off a poll that they took back in July between Vice President Harris and the former president, showing Donald Trump with a 2-point lead over Kamala Harris. A 7-point shift in just around 2 months is something that is really monumental for the Kamala Harris campaign. We've been waiting for some high-quality major national polls from major news networks that have historically gotten these things quite accurate when it comes down to gauging national sentiment. Now, NBC News also released a poll at the same time, CBS News released a poll at the same time that pretty much ran even with that of Kamala Harris's lead over Donald Trump. They showed Kamala Harris with a 4-point lead. NBC News has a 5-point lead. Overall, though, a lot larger than what some of the averages are saying in terms of Kamala Harris's chances and percent against Donald Trump. The FiveThirtyEight average has Kamala Harris with a 2.9% upper hand over the former president. Real Clear Politics has it at roughly 2.2%. So anytime that there's a major pollster, especially one that is pretty well respected, showing Kamala Harris with this 5-point lead nationwide, it's something that you just simply cannot ignore. And it also comes at a time, too, where we have seen consistently across these battleground states. In fact, you can see that the most recently read or most popular article here on the Hill is Harris slightly improves lead over Trump in battleground states. This is something that is happening really on the national scale, largely after the presidential debate in which Kamala Harris had a decisive victory over the former president, something that many Republicans were hoping simply wouldn't happen, but ultimately, to the Democratic Party's benefit, absolutely did. Now, this 5-point lead, too, I also have come to see really comes at a time where NBC News has not had a single poll of the election cycle showing the Democrats ahead against Donald Trump. That means even in strong moments for Joe Biden in the aftermath of the State of the Union, or in weaker moments for Donald Trump in the aftermath and the wake of the guilty verdict back in 2023, there's not 2023, May of 2024, and the indictments and all these different things. I mean, the fact remains that there is no point more beneficial and more promising for Democrats than today than at any point on in the campaign season. And it seems that it will only get better as the campaign season continues, as Kamala Harris starts to be in a position where she can do better across these battleground states. No major presidential debates coming up, no major conventions coming up, no real opportunities for Donald Trump to surge nationwide. And what we are finding is that really not much is changing the trajectory of this race in a bad way for Vice President Harris. Now, this 5-point lead also visualized is something that I want us to explore in this video because it really does show why this is monumental. I made a video a while back talking about a 6-point lead, but a 5-point lead is also something that Kamala Harris would very much enjoy, and for all the right reasons. You see, a 5-point lead nationally would result in Kamala Harris winning the election hands down. It's actually roughly on par with what we saw Joe Biden receive in the 2020 election, where he won by 4.5% nationwide. Now, sure, I get it. The circumstances were a bit different, and maybe some states were voting a little bit differently in a time and era where Roe v. Wade was law of the land, and there wasn't a major concern over the issue of abortion rights nationwide. But ultimately, what we have seen and come to know about this election cycle is that there are higher stakes seemingly than even in the time of a once-in-a-century pandemic for the American public, that people see this election likely as one of the most important elections of their lifetimes. In the aftermath of the January 6th insurrection, of the aftermath of the Dobbs v. Jackson decision, the aftermath of so many Supreme Court decisions that the American public, quite frankly, at large disapproves of on the national scale. We are at a point now where this election feels entirely different for so many different voters, even if the last one then felt like the most important race. And so a 5-point lead, again, visualizing what this looks like. It looks like a Colorado victory. It looks like a New Mexico victory for the Democrats. Virginia, Minnesota, it's pretty much about running up the margins here. Republicans still win in Iowa. They still win in Ohio, right? They could still very well win in Florida. They still win in Alaska. They still win in Texas. But Democrats pull ahead in states like Wisconsin. Slight improvement there. Slight improvement in Michigan. Slight improvement in Pennsylvania. That's enough electoral votes to get them to the presidency. Democrats still win Nevada. Democrats still win Arizona. Democrats still win Georgia. And they flip North Carolina based on a 5-point national lead. And the fact remains, not only was this just a 5-point lead, it's not as if NBC News has been one of the better pollsters for Democrats. In fact, it has not been. Looking at the numbers and the data points for NBC News over the past year, they have shown Donald Trump with an upper hand, even in moments where the national average may not have shown him ahead by just as much. Or maybe at some points even shown it neck and neck, and yet NBC News is saying that Donald Trump has the advantage. It would really be one thing if the pollster like NBC had been saying for, years on end, without failure, that Democrats were the ones with the upper hand. But in 2022, they said Republicans were going to win the national popular vote, and they did. In 2024, they're now saying that Kamala Harris has the upper hand. Now, looking at the numbers between Joe Biden and Donald Trump had roughly a 3-point advantage over Joe Biden. But they actually did ask, because again, this was around the time of conversation around whether or not Joe Biden should be replaced at the top of the ticket. This 3-point lead ends up being a 2-point lead over Kamala Harris, but it is still a 2-point lead for Donald Trump nonetheless. And again, it is a poll that has been consistently in favor of the Republican Party. Again, this would be so different if this was a poll that had just churned out pro-Democrat numbers, but that's not where we're at, which is why I find it really difficult to really look back at the historical aspects of this poll and try to shut it down. There are a number of polls that have come out that have shown Kamala Harris with a 5-point lead, but none as important, as impressive, as meaningful as an NBC News national poll. Their first one they have released, the first one we are analyzing since July. And so I think we are also going to be seeing a lot of new data points, likely over the coming weeks, that more agree with a 5-point lead than a 1-point lead, are in more agreement of a 4-point lead than a Trump lead. And I think that's because Kamala Harris has started to break away from the closeness of this election. Not in a way that means this election is wraps and that she's going to easily win the presidency, but it absolutely means that she is getting to a point where people are perceiving her more positively. We are getting to a point where people are now more comfortable saying they are going to vote for her. We are now getting to a point where some of the polls that used to be very bad for Democrats are now becoming very good for Democrats, in a near total whiplash in a 7-point swing in just around 2 months. Kamala Harris took her image and her candidacy at the time that was being weighed against Donald Trump again too. She was down 2 points nationally. This wasn't Joe Biden's number. It's actually an 8-point improvement off of Joe Biden's number, but this is her number. This is a 2-point loss she was experiencing. She has now turned into a 5-point victory. And as the trend line shows, this is not anything new. When Kamala Harris first entered into the race, she was losing 2 points nationwide. Donald Trump had the upper hand. As much as Democrats found a newfound sense of enthusiasm and, donated hundreds of millions of dollars, it's clear that investment, that money, those changes of resources, those investments across the United States have changed the way Americans view the race. Because Donald Trump didn't immediately lose that much support in the immediate swap of the nominee. He was at 47.9% when Joe Biden dropped out of the race and leading by 3.1, and then Kamala Harris enters in 3 days later. He's up by 1.6, sure, a tightening of the race, but from 47.9 down to just 47.5. But again, with time and money and resources, the Democratic Party changed the way that the American public not only viewed Kamala Harris, but also Donald Trump. He was on a consistent upward trend in terms of how voters viewed him and how positively they viewed him. You can see that it went up and up and up, and at that presidential debate right then, Joe Biden went from being down 1.5 down to being down 3 points nationwide, a massive dip on the national scale. But continuing, you can see Donald Trump really was on the up and up. And when you take a look at the time that Joe Biden dropped out of the race, there actually was the highest point for Trump ever in this election cycle right then. Donald Trump was climbing and climbing and climbing, and things didn't look better for Joe Biden as time went on. But as I was saying, as soon as Kamala Harris entered into this race, in just about 3 weeks, Kamala Harris took the lead. In just about a month, she expanded that lead to 1 point. In just about 2 months, she expanded that lead to 2 points. And now she's leading by more than ever in the NBC News and CBS News poll. That bodes really good results when it translates to an electoral college victory. Because what also the 2022 midterms showed us was that you don't necessarily need to be the most popular person in the world to win an election. And you don't necessarily need to be the most likable person either. But what you do need to be is not an extremist. The Democratic Party did a really good job at painting out Donald Trump's hand-picked candidates for governor and Senate and House and turned them into people that people viewed very negatively. And while a lot of this was really just due to their own actions, at the end of the day, the Democratic Party played a major hand in really encouraging these Republicans to run in the first place, whether that meant funding some of the primary ads to boost those Republicans that were seen as too extreme to win the general election, because Democrats went all in on a campaign strategy against Donald Trump that they really thought might pay off. And pay off it did. Donald Trump's brand was toxic, is not something that the average Republican, in theory, who wants to win a swing district should have associated with them. But it is the only way one Republican makes it through a primary. And so as a result, they resort to Trump-like tendencies. They resort to Donald Trump's speaking points and talking points. They resort to being members of his faction of the party that are uniquely palatable to the majority of Republican voters, but are uniquely unpalatable to the majority of actual voters. And that's why there's been this massive disconnect, and that the last time we've really seen Donald Trump era type Republicans, namely himself, win an election was in 2016. And now it looks like he's going to lose this one too. If Kamala Harris has this 5-point lead nationwide, it really, really matters. And we're also seeing too that in the case of double haters, people that say they don't like Trump or Harris, Kamala Harris wins those people by a majority. Earlier on, Donald Trump won them over Joe Biden. And back in July, we see that 12% of voters, the last time they did this poll, said they didn't want to vote for either Trump or Biden. Now that number has sunk to just 7%. And who's gaining a lot of that support? Kamala Harris. There are a lot of left-leaning voters out there that said, I don't want to vote for Joe Biden for a variety of different reasons. I don't want to vote for Joe Biden because he's too right-leaning for me. I don't want to vote for Joe Biden because he didn't expand the United States Supreme Court. I don't want to vote for Joe Biden because of a variety of different issues. There are many Democrats out there. And an issue very important and near and dear to the hearts of many young voters in this country is the conflict in Israel and Palestine. And looking at the numbers for that for Joe Biden, he very clearly was disapproved of by the overwhelming majority of young Americans in his handling of conflict in the Middle East. What did that result in? Loss in support. What did that result in? Voters saying they didn't want to vote for either candidate. And what did that result in? A Donald Trump victory. Kamala Harris doesn't face that issue as much. And in terms of her favorability rating, as I was saying, Joe Biden was also quite unpopular. She has jumped 16 points in favorability rating, the largest increase for a politician in NBC News in a survey from them since George W. Bush, who saw a surge in approval after the 9/11 attacks. We're finding here that Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's race is now being defined and shaped by Kamala Harris surging in favorability rating that NBC News says they haven't seen for a politician ever since 9/11 with then President George W. Bush. That is insanity. That is insanity to think about that this is the current state of Kamala Harris's candidacy because she has surged so much that in a 16-point swing, she has swung the national vote share by 7 whole percentage points. And what a 5-point victory looks a lot like this on an electoral map, which means Kamala Harris not only wins the election, but expands on Joe Biden's margin in a lot of these states. And if I was looking at it from the lens of Kamala Harris and her campaign, never once would I think that this means that she's guaranteed to win the election. But what I do think it shows is that there is support here for Kamala Harris that did not exist for Joe Biden, and it is only increasing as time goes on. Kamala Harris's campaign has challenged Donald Trump to a second debate. August 23rd is the date they propose. I'm interested to see if that debate does actually happen. Donald Trump already said he's not going to do it, but we do know that he's a bit wishy-washy on deciding whether or not debates are going to happen. It seems like the Kamala Harris campaign wants another debate. I'm not entirely sure, if we will see it happen or not, but ultimately, Kamala Harris's campaign team has said, we want another debate. Kamala Harris herself has accepted the debate on CNN, which is a network that Donald Trump praised actually after the first presidential debate. But Donald Trump's team right now is saying no. I'd be interested to see if they end up saying yes, because there might be mounting pressure for Donald Trump to try to save his candidacy, especially as the numbers get worse and the polls start to show more favoritism towards Kamala Harris. I really think there might be a reconsideration from the right wing about whether or not they should invest more in debates or they should go ahead and spend more time on the national stage against Kamala Harris. There will be a lot of questions, a lot of considerations, especially as new data points like this really go to show that Kamala Harris has completely turned around this race even when she was the one in consideration. For a long time, we've spent talking about the Biden to Harris shift, let's talk about that Harris to Harris shift. A shift that we saw that put Donald Trump ahead by 2 points over then Vice President Harris, who was not the Democratic nominee at this point, and now the largest lead ever for the Democrats in a mainstream high-quality poll from a news network. And not to mention the only time of this election cycle that Democrats take the lead in an NBC News national poll, which is honestly very good news for the Democratic Party and shows that with room to grow, they could expand their lead to even higher than where it was back in 2020 and may be on track for a victory that's even higher than it was under Joe Biden. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.